Today, I'm pleased to present the very long overdue continuation of my Dead by Daylight series, The Story of Every Killer. In this series, we take a deep dive into the lore behind the killers in DBD, but in a hopefully refreshing, entertaining kind of way. At least, that's the goal. So, if you enjoy this video and want to see more, feel free to smack the shit out of the like button, and maybe even drop a comment and let me know. If not, I'll just assume this video sucks and go about my merry way. Alright, buckle up, ladies and gents. This is the story of every killer in Dead by Daylight, chapters 29 to 34. On August 29th, 2023, Dead by Daylight enjoyers were graced with yet another licensed chapter. Chapter 29, Alien. Chapter 29 gave us another absolutely botched female survivor model, Ellen Ripley, the Ron Jeremy of all maps, the Nostromo wreckage, and of course, the Xenomorph. The Xenomorph is from the 1979 sci-fi horror cult classic, Alien. In deep space, the 7-man crew of the commercial starship called the Nostromo are cryo-sleeping peacefully on their return journey back to Earth. While they're out like a sack of potatoes, the crew is suddenly yanked from cryo-sleep by a distress call coming from an alien vessel. And as is company policy, the crew is required to investigate any and all transmissions that may indicate intelligent life. The Nostromo lands on a nearby planet the distress call came from, and the crew gears up and heads out to investigate. They narrow the transmission to a crashed alien spaceship, where they find the remains of a giant alien with a hole in its torso. The Nostromo's computer, simply named Mother, deciphers part of the transmission, and the crew comes to find out that it was a warning message. As the crew continues to explore, the crew member Kane discovers a chamber on the ship with a metric shit ton of large eggs scattered all around. Curiosity gets the best of him, and he slowly reaches down to touch one of the eggs. As soon as Kane's finger touches it, a little spider-like creature pops out of the egg and immediately pierces through his helmet, attaching to his face. The crew carry the now unconscious Kane back to the Nostromo, alien still attached. The acting senior officer, Ellen Ripley, at first refuses to let them enter due to company quarantine regulations, but another crew member named Ash overrules her. Boy, if only they would have listened to her. The crew attempts to remove the creature from Kane's face, but they stop when they discover its blood is highly corrosive, and they fear it could kill Kane and damage the ship. Luckily, the creature eventually detaches itself and dies. As Kane somewhat recovers, the crew returns to space. They are enjoying one last meal before heading back to cryosleep as the ship makes its way back to Earth. Suddenly, Kane starts choking on his food and convulsing. At first, they thought it was just Ellen's cooking. They've had issues in the past. But no, not this time. Before they know it, an alien creature bursts out of Kane's torso, killing him instantly. All hell breaks loose. At this point, this is where the Xenomorph's lore in DBD kicks off, and since it's so short for the rest of the segment, I'll be reading from the official lore. A perfect organism, born of violence, designed to kill. The Xenomorph emerged from the chest cavity of a host named Kane and sought cover in the shadows of the Nostromo. As it shed its skin, the Xenomorph came to understand its environment. Using the ship's air ducts, it killed its prey one by one, until only the human Ripley remained. Desperate for survival, Ripley destroyed the Nostromo and sought refuge in an escape vessel. But the Xenomorph's instincts gave it the edge. As the escape vessel floated through space, the Xenomorph lay in wait, watching its prey. Just as it went in for the kill, the vessel's airlocks opened, and the Xenomorph was ejected into the cold vacuum of space. All was lost. The Xenomorph was close to death. And then, in an instant, it disappeared in a cloud of black fog. The 80s saw some of the most iconic horror movies of all time grace the screen across the globe. Movies such as Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Hellraiser, and of course, Child's Play. The first movie of the Child's Play franchise was released in 1988, a supernatural slasher film where a dying serial killer transfers his consciousness into a popular kid's doll using voodoo. That serial killer's name was Charles Lee Ray, or better known as Chucky. Now, the Chucky in DBD is based off the second film in the franchise, Child's Play 2. So, I'll quickly summarize the first film just to get you caught up to speed. The 30-year-old serial killer Charles Lee Ray, who was known as the Lakeshore Strangler, killed a dozen people and was hunted down by a detective named Mike Norris. After a brief chase, Norris shoots Charles in the chest, mortally wounding him. Charles manages to take cover in a toy store, where he stumbles upon boxes of good guy dolls, which are an extremely popular doll aimed at young children. Luckily for him, Charles was well versed in the dark arts, and in one last-ditch effort to save himself, he performs a voodoo ritual to transfer his soul into one of the good guy dolls. And it works. As soon as the ritual is complete, the toy store is hit by lightning, setting the building on fire. At the same time, a young boy named Andy Barkley tells his mother Karen that he wants one of those cool good guy dolls he saw on TV, but money is tight. To please her son on his birthday, she tracks down a peddler on the street who just happens to be selling stolen good guy dolls on the cheap. But they say you get what you pay for, and Karen is going to have some serious buyer's remorse from this purchase. That's because, of course, the doll that she bought came with the soul of a serial killer, and his name is Chucky. Chucky goes on a rampage once he gets to the Barkleys' apartment, murdering Andy's Aunt Maggie, his former voodoo instructor John Bishop, and quite a few others. But once it's all said and done, Detective Mike finally shoots Chucky in the heart, which is the only way to kill him, as his doll body is slowly developing human vulnerabilities, a side effect of the voodoo. 2 years later, and now in the second film, Chucky is being reassembled by the Play Pals Corporation, who manufactured the Good Guy doll line. The corporation is desperately trying to recover from the negative publicity surrounding Chucky's rampage, and reassembling the doll is their way to show the shareholders that there was nothing defective with the doll. But once they're on the final step of reassembling Chucky, which is plopping the eyeballs in, the machine being used to perform the job gets hit by a massive power surge, which sends one of the workers flying, killing him instantly. Chucky is reanimated from the power surge. Chucky's mission now is to hunt down little Andy Barkley because he needs to transfer his soul to Andy's body specifically, because Andy was the first person Chucky revealed his true form to. This is what his voodoo instructor John Bishop told him right before Chucky murdered him. If Chucky doesn't transfer his soul into Andy's body, he will be trapped in the good guy doll for all of eternity. Andy is now in a foster home with the Simpsons family. Nope, not them. After his mother was institutionalized for also claiming a kid's doll had murdered a bunch of people. But luckily for Andy, he would meet his saving grace with the Simpsons family. Kyle is a teenager who is also being fostered by the Simpsons family. She watches over Andy like a big sister, and when Chucky weaves his way back into the Simpsons home, she does everything in her power to stop that evil doll. The fight between Chucky, Kyle, and Andy makes its way all over town, from the foster center Andy and Kyle came from, all the way to the Good Guy factory. Here, Chucky manages to get Andy by himself, and he lays him down to perform the ritual to steal Andy's body. But in just the nick of time, Kyle appeared out of nowhere and pushed a bunch of Good Guy boxes over Chucky. Chucky let out a massive roar from his tiny little body as he looked down an aisle and saw Andy running into a black fog that had started to consume the factory. And not wanting to lose his only chance for a real body, he charged through the fog, screaming after Andy.
Yeah, take this, dipshit!
As H.P. Lovecraft once said, the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. That quote beautifully encapsulates this next killer. The 31st chapter released in Dead by Daylight was the All Things Wicked chapter. Released on March 12, 2024, players saw the introduction of the emo baddie Sable Ward, the map Greenville Square, and the killer, the Unknown. Similarly to the entity that brought it into this realm, the Unknown is able to shapeshift into essentially anything, but mainly manifesting into something relevant to the victim that unknowingly summoned it. If that sounds incredibly vague, that's because it's supposed to be. Even the DBD Wiki states, the Unknown is a being beyond understanding, though many have tried. One of those people that tried to make sense of the Unknown was a college student named Olivia. While all of her peers were using ChatGPT to write their theses, Olivia was actually thrilled to work on her master's thesis. That's because hers was focused on urban legends and their origins, something that she was very interested in. Her studies brought her to the story of a woman's disappearance in Greenville, who disappeared without a trace in front of a group of witnesses. But what really caught Olivia's attention was a few weeks after the woman's disappearance, her friend also suddenly vanished after investigating the mystery. Detectives were puzzled about the strange disappearances. They had no clues or leads to go off. This created the perfect storm for an urban legend. But seemingly not fazed by the fact that investigating the unknown usually leads to vanishing off the face of the earth, Olivia wanted to try her hand at solving the mystery. So she booked a hotel with apparently the worst reviews she could find because it came with the penetrating smell of cigarettes, mold, and booze. But Olivia didn't care. She was on a mission. From God. Olivia picked a wall that had the least amount of bodily fluids splattered on it and set up her own version of an evidence board. On this board, she taped up all of the evidence and theories she's gathered surrounding the legend of the unknown and its origins. The amount of theories of the origins of the unknown were vast. Theories ranging from it being an alien from Area 51, a monster summoned by an ancient cult thousands of years ago, and maybe even Bigfoot, which can be gathered from the unknown's rare add-on called Footprint Cast. The cast sits in the Museum of the Weird in Sarasota, Florida, and has long since been debunked. One conclusion from all of the theories, however, was, legend was it thrived in darkness and stole the voices of those it consumed, so as to lure others to their doom. This may have been the case for a group of college students who vanished in the late 1950s. The group entered a movie theater to catch a flick one night. The movie went off just as any other movie would. However, once the movie ended and the lights in the room came on, all of the college students had disappeared. Witnesses reported seeing them enter the theater and seeing them during the movie. However, no one saw them leave, and no sign of them was ever found. Another of the unknown's rare add-ons, Movie B Poster, might provide a little more insight into the theory of the college group's disappearance. The movie was rumored to be state-funded propaganda, made specifically for something called Project Apple Pie. Project Apple Pie, which I reckon is an obvious reference to the very real Project MK Ultra, was a top-secret government research program where hallucinogenic drugs were being used against willing and unwilling civilians as part of a mind control experiment. The experiments took place in hospitals, universities, and of course, movie theaters. Many believe these unethical experiments opened doorways to other dimensions, which allowed evil things to enter the world. Oddly enough, I covered the story of MK Ultra in my video about the conspiracy theories surrounding Rockstar Games, should you be so inclined. Back in the shitty hotel, Olivia was hard at work observing her evidence board. She noticed the one difference that separated the Greenville disappearances from the rest was the mention of a thick black fog. She had heard other urban legends about this curious black fog, so she zoned in on Greenville. Olivia sketched out what she imagined the unknown might look like, and then slapped it dead center on the evidence board. Immediately after, she started to question if that was a bad idea, and if the unknown was going to pay her a visit. Yes, it will. Hours passed, and Olivia sat in the hotel, drinking cold coffee and poring over all of her evidence, waiting for something to happen. At 2 a.m., Olivia would get exactly what she wished for. A whisper was heard off in the distance. Olivia. She wasn't sure if she was just hearing things. She shrugged it off. She definitely heard that. It was coming from the bathroom. The lights in the room began to flicker as Olivia got up and started slowly walking towards the bathroom door. At first, she thought it was just her friends pranking her. Bit of a stretch. Behind the door, she could hear the voice whispering her name again. The lights flickered off. The sounds behind the door turned into something inhuman sounding. The lights turned back on, and now a black fog is pouring out from underneath the door. Olivia turned the knob and slowly opened the door. She saw a big mass with tentacles being pulled into the thick fog. She was at a crossroads. She wasn't sure if she should just run or finally learn the truth of the unknown. As she weighed out her options, dozens of voices began to call out to her with promises of the unknown and the impossible and of unearthly things beyond human experience.
Hey, yo, what the
1974 was a wild time to be alive. President Richard Nixon resigned after a questionable term. A brand new car cost around $4,500. A sixth grader from Alabama won the National Spelling Bee with the word hydrophyte. And a brand new board game named Dungeons & Dragons would find its way into the homes of nerds all across America. The fantasy role-playing game quickly became extremely popular, and in the 80s was at the forefront of a moral panic controversy, where it received intense scrutiny for allegedly promoting Satanism, witchcrafts, suicide, pornography, and murder.
People took the pieces. Now, there's sixes involved in the pieces of the game, but they would throw them in the incinerator or the fireplace and screams would come out because there seemed to be some kind of spiritual forces inhabiting those pieces, and children would drop out of life. They didn't want to study anymore.
The shit people will believe. The original 1974 board game Dungeons & Dragons was created by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. The game has a vast amount of rules, and entire supplemental rulebooks were published detailing them all. In the third supplement, released in 1976, entitled Eldritch Wizardry, the creator of the supplement, Brian Bloom, invented two artifacts he called the Hand and the Eye of Vecna. Vecna was an evil lich who had been destroyed long ago. Or so they thought. If you're unaware, like I was, a lich is a dead body or corpse. And in D&D specifically, they are an undead creature who seek to defy death by magical means. It's also widely believed that the name Vecna itself is an anagram for the name Vance, which is the surname of the fantasy author Jack Vance, who was a big inspiration for the magic system used in Dungeons & Dragons. I feel like it's worth mentioning the presence of Vecna in Stranger Things, since D&D plays a big part in the show's lore. He is essentially the same idea, just different origins. The Stranger Things Vecna is a man named Henry Creel, who was born with psychokinetic abilities. As a child, he's transferred to Hawkins National Laboratory to be studied as their very first child test subject, 001. However, he instead goes on to murder all the other child test subjects. All of them, except for one, named 11 of course. As far as the story of Vecna goes, at least in the Dead by Daylight universe, he began as somewhat of a young wizard prodigy. All of his fellow peers focused on perfecting one aspect of the School of Magic. He was well above and beyond at all of them. Vecna's intentions were pure at the beginning, but that would all change the day his mother was executed for witchcraft. Following his mother's execution, Vecna became completely obsessed with mastering the darkest school of magic, necromancy. Necromancy is the conjuration of the spirits of the dead for purposes of magically revealing the future or influencing the course of events. As Vecna became stronger and stronger, his desire for even more power also grew. Centuries would pass, and he would grow beyond human and achieve lichdom. With his insane power also came an empire, which he ruled over from his rotted tower. His never-ending search for dark knowledge led him to many different realms. But back in his own stomping grounds of all places, a servant would find something that truly caught Vecna's attention. A spell torn from an ancient tome was discovered, which Vecna sensed an incredible dark energy emitting from. Only issue was, he didn't understand the language at all. He had never seen it before, and there was no documentation of it anywhere. So, in Vecna's true obsessive behavior, he would spend months carefully dissecting the script, deciphering every letter, but to no avail. His obsession with the ancient spell took the forefront of his attention, and he even left his kingly duties to his lieutenants. The only thing that broke him out of his obsessive trance was the rumors of people disappearing in the night, with no sign being left behind. When the disappearances were investigated, Vecna could sense the exact same dark energy he felt from that torn page. Vecna didn't understand, and he did not like to not understand things. He finally put two and two together and theorized, what if these people weren't dying and instead were actually disappearing? He reconstructed the script with his new theory and took it for a test run. From the comfort of his dark and scary bedroom, he began to speak the words aloud. As he did, the room began to fill with a thick black fog. Vecna could sense himself being transported somewhere else, and at first he resisted. He incanted spells he had learned by heart. It kept the fog at bay, but as he concentrated on the dark energy that was pulling him in, it was actually quite charming. Something about it was intriguing to him, so he finally accepted and let the fog consume him. He didn't understand where he was now, at least not yet, but he knew in his cold, unbeating heart that his dark secrets would one day be his. On August 27th, 2024, Dead by Daylight players saw the iconic vampire Dracula, or his real name, Vlad Tepes Dracula, brought into the fold. Chapter 33 was another licensed chapter, with its content based off the 1986 action platform game Castlevania, or how it's known in Japan, Akumajo Dracula. The new content in Chapter 33 was Dracula, of course, and a new survivor, Trevor Belmont. Oddly enough, there was no new map released with Chapter 33. Seems like a castle map would have been fitting, but then again, I don't quite understand many of Behavior's decisions. Anyways, if we go back to the very beginning, the original idea for Dracula came from the gothic horror novel also called Dracula, which was written by a man named Bram Stoker in 1897. The game Castlevania was directly inspired by this novel, with the game's director, Hitoshi Akamatsu, crediting Stoker's novel for the idea of the iconic vampire, as well as wanting players to feel like they were in a classic horror film, which is exactly the vibe I get when watching the gameplay. While the original idea for Dracula in Castlevania came to life in the 1986 game, the model that DBD's Dracula is based off came from Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which was released in 1997. Symphony of the Night was a direct sequel to the 1993 Castlevania game Rondo of Blood. In Symphony of the Night, however, Dracula's Dhampir son Alucard is the main focus as the protagonist. A Dhampir, by the way, is a child whose parents are a vampire and a human. Alucard's parents were of course Dracula, and a woman named Lisa, who, in a similar vein to Vecna's story, is executed for witchcraft. In basically every one of the Castlevania games, the plot revolves around someone, usually from the Belmont family, needing to defeat Dracula. And since there's no joke like 30 Castlevania games, old Vlad sure does take a lot of L's. But he gets resurrected every time, so it's no big deal. But that's enough of Dracula's backstory. Let's dive into exactly how he came into the fog. Following the execution of Lisa, the love of his life, Dracula was on a mission to find the infamous Crimson Stone. The Crimson Stone was one of two of the greatest treasures a vampire could acquire, the other being the Ebony Stone. The Crimson Stone contained the soul of a very powerful vampire. Should the owner acquire the stone, he will be granted immortality and immense power. The only side effect being it turns you into a vampire, and removes any hints of your humanity. Dracula managed to get his hands on the Crimson Stone, and subsequently started sleeping upside down and craving human blood. That's right, he became Robert Pattinson. Just kidding, he became the Dark Lord. While the Dark Lord acquired some extremely OP vampire abilities, he had to keep the tank full to stay a vampire, which meant blood. Lots of blood. So, Dracula's new schedule included sleeping by day and hunting humans by night. But his constant grind mindset paid off, seeing Dracula eventually build a castle of his own in Romania, which he protected with dark magic, and turned the locals into the living dead. Many people fought back and tried to bring the Dark Lord down, but he was just too dang strong. That would be until the Belmont clan came around and finally gave him a run for his money. In 1476, Trevor Belmont of the Belmont family finally ended Dracula's reign of terror thanks to the use of the Vampire Killer, which was a holy whip that was created with alchemy. But like I mentioned before, Dracula has no problem taking a loss because he can always be resurrected. And over 5 centuries later, he would return once again. In 1999, Dracula was resurrected and raised an army of the undead. But who better to stop Dracula again than the Belmont clan? This time, it's Julius Belmont. And he's got the same vampire killer in hand that his ancestors used to bring Dracula down many moons ago. The Battle of 1999 went down in Dracula's castle. As expected, Julius whooped Dracula's ass with the Holy Whip. Everybody thought Dracula was gone for good this time. Little did they know, as Julius tore him a new one, a strange fog rolled in across the floor of Dracula's castle. Dracula felt an icy touch and something beckoning to him, and he obliged. The fog took him to a place where he could be resurrected yet again, and continue his reign of annihilating humanity.
Wow!
To understand how the Houndmaster came to be, we need to take a trip over to the infamous Caribbean islands. Known for its breathtaking beaches, wonderful weather, and beautiful blue waters, the Caribbean islands are somewhat of a paradise on Earth. That is, of course, aside from the murderous pirates, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Here we find a young girl named Portia Maye, whose father, a seasoned sailor and entrepreneur of sorts, helped establish a settlement on an uncharted island that they aptly named the Town of Fortune. Fortune became a highly prosperous settlement for sailors and merchants with the help of Portia's father. Portia was extremely close to her father, basking in his knowledge of the sea and all of his stories. He often read to her all sorts of literature, ranging from Shakespeare all the way to Greek mythology. He would also take her along with him on sailing expeditions, keeping her safe from the infinite possibilities of troubles one can find out in the vast ocean. One of the trips Portia accompanied her father on was a trip to Italy, where he had the intentions of trading sugar and silver for rare silks and spices. But when a bunch of puppies catch your eye, one can't help but to envision how much better your life would be if you could take every single one of them home. Portia Maye and her father were no different. A litter of Corso puppies were being sold here, and understandably, Portia wanted them all. I mean, can you blame her? Luckily, her father was cool AF and agreed to take them all. His excuse being that they could be trained as hunting dogs for Fortune's annual hunting tournaments. Little Portia Maye was head over heels with her puppies. She quickly named them all: Caesar, King, Shah, Athena, and of course, the runt of the group, Snug. However, life is not all puppies and rainbows, and the return trip back to Fortune would unfortunately put an end to this streak of peace, and seal the tragic fate of Portia's mortal life. Portia's father's ship, which was dubbed Nightstream, would encounter a vicious storm out at sea on their way back. He did everything he could to desperately steer Nightstream to safety, but the violent storm would eventually push the ship into a dangerous area known very well to be infested with pirates. And just as things couldn't get any worse, they would come in direct path with some of these pirates. A ship being led by a pirate called Mad Moloch attacked Nightstream and took it over quickly. The few that survived the attack were forced to fight to the death, with the promise of the victor being set free. Portia's father wanted nothing to do with their little game and refused. Moloch then commanded his son, Tariq, to take care of Portia's father. For hours, Tariq tortured him, and once he finally had enough of that, Tariq slit his throat. Portia was fortunately, or unfortunately, kept alive, as Moloch decided he could use her knowledge to lead his crew into Fortune with somewhat of a Trojan horse play. But best believe Portia wasn't going to let that happen. She used her deep knowledge of the area to instead lead Moloch and his ship into an area that Portia had been warned to never ever go. Dragon Tooth's Island. Dragon's Tooth Island was an area the locals rumored to be cursed. Stories spoke of an unimaginable evil inhabiting the island. Portia was aware that it might be suicide for her to sail into the cursed island, but if it meant taking down the man who killed her father with her, it was still a W. Moloch fell for the trap, as Portia led Nightstream into Dragon's Tooth Island, with Moloch's ship right behind her. As Portia approached the island, dark clouds quickly rolled in and a black fog surrounded the ships. Portia looked behind her and caught a glimpse of Moloch dipping out of there, as he quickly realized he did not want the smoke. The plan had failed. But Portia refused to surrender. If she turned around, it would certainly spell the end of her and her community. Instead, she pushed on, straight into Dragon Tooth's Island. The growing storm quickly overpowered Nightstream as it plowed through the dense fog and lightning. Painfully loud screeching could be heard as the ship began to capsize. Portia opened her eyes to see her little pup, Snug, looking down at her. He was looking at her face, telling her to get up. She tried to get up, but quickly collapsed onto the strange purple sand that covered the island. Portia mustered up the courage and slowly picked herself up again. It wouldn't take long for her to realize that they were absolutely stranded on Dragon Tooth's Island. Dragon Tooth's Island was not a good place to be. Portia's father described it to her as a living nightmare that tortured the mind and played with the heart, and Portia's mind definitely became a victim of the island. She heard sounds of creatures she's never heard before, and worst of all, she began seeing Moloch everywhere. At first, all she could do was scream her lungs out, with Snug eventually jumping on her lap to calm her down. But with Portia's undeniable will to live, she would make it through. Years would pass, and she survived off anything that washed ashore, as well as coconuts and purple seaweed. Every day, she fought all of the creatures that stalked the island. Ferocious animals, vicious humans, and savage abominations not of this world. But she wasn't alone. Little Snug was right by her side the entire time. Except Snug wasn't so little now, weighing in at over 100 pounds at this point. The two became an inseparable savage duo, with other survivors on the island keeping their distance for fear of what Portia might do should they not. One day, Snug had ventured off without Portia. It wasn't uncommon for him to do so, but nonetheless, Portia still went out to search for him. At this point in time, Portia had long but given up on the idea of escaping the island. She had no way out, and she had become accustomed to the way of life on the cursed island. But that would all change when she would spot something she thought she would never see again: Nightstream. Out of the cold black fog surrounding the island, the ship slowly drifted in, just offshore. She was hesitant at first, knowing how the island can play tricks on your mind, but nonetheless, she went off into the water to retrieve her long-lost ship. But as she made her way through the water, she was attacked by a group of castaways. That's lightweight for the Houndmaster though. She made quick work of the group, but decided to spare a few of them, as she would need some of them to crew her ship. With her new, somewhat unwilling crew and her old ship back in her hands, she pushed on, continuing the search for Snug. Unfortunately, that day would not come, and Snug was gone as if he was never there in the first place. Now, if you've ever seen John Wick, you can understand the places people can go should their dog be taken away from them. And it's no coincidence that Portia would go on a rampage as the days went on without her dog. For decades, Portia made her way all around the Caribbean, slowly turning into a creature of her own. With her best friend gone and her father's killer still out there, she showed no mercy as she slaughtered every pirate she came across, and she focused her attention back on the hunt for that rat bastard Mad Moloch. It was like a dark parasite slowly grew inside her. Spilling the blood of the ones who got in her way seemed to satisfy it, but if she couldn't satisfy it, the parasite would wreak havoc on her mind, completely erasing any sense of reason, and the face of Moloch began to appear on everyone around her. She slaughtered him every chance she got, but he would inevitably dematerialize into wisps of black fog. Her crew knew they were fucked if they stuck around much longer with Portia diving into absolute madness, so they decided to mutiny with Moloch. Unfortunately for them, Portia found out about their plan. I need not describe the absolute massacre that ensued, but she decided to spare the lives of 5 people, as she would need the extra hands when they find Moloch. With her now extremely unwilling crew, Nightstream set sail towards Mad Moloch's island. When Portia arrived, Moloch wasn't there. He was out for a spin on the water. But someone even better was there: Moloch's son, Tariq. When Moloch returned to his island, he was quite confused at first. The whole place was deserted, aside from some hooded woman he spotted wandering around. The woman then approached Moloch and offered unfathomable treasures that she claimed only she could take Moloch to. Her only request was to join the crew. In order to sweeten up the deal, the woman offered to prepare a massive feast for the crew. Moloch paused for a second, but he was never one to pass up a good deal, and he obliged. He asked the lady if she'd seen his son, Tariq. She smiled and assured him his son would be joining them for dinner. Later that night, Moloch and his crew sat down for dinner, and the woman delivered on her promise, as a massive feast was laid out in front of the men. Much like me at Chipotle, Moloch absolutely housed the delicious food and drink in front of him. The meat was cooked just perfectly, nice and crisp with a slight char on the outside, pink and tender on the inside. Moloch was delighted by the meal and asked the woman if it was wild boar or venison. What on earth could taste this good? The woman stood up and slowly removed the hood from her head. Portia smiled for a moment, then lifted the lid off a golden food cover, revealing the decapitated head of Moloch's son, Tariq. Moloch let out a roar that sounded nothing short of a dying bull, as he tried to process the gruesome sight of his son's decapitated head, which Portia so graciously glazed like a roast, with gold and jewels pouring out of his mouth, the head frozen with a look of pure terror on its face. Portia reveled in the moment, as she's thought about this exact moment endlessly for years on end. Meanwhile, in the background, a thick black fog began to seep from the floor. Portia swiftly pulled out her sharpened cane and charged at Moloch. But as her strike came down, in the blink of a moment, Moloch was yanked into the darkness by some unforeseen force. Portia's victorious mood instantly became filled with nothing but absolute pure rage. The veins on her neck popped out as the parasite consuming her mind came back with vengeance, its talons crushing down on her. The feeling of a scream tried to make its way out of Portia's body, but it was cut short by the sound of something Portia hadn't heard for many, many years, but recognized instantly. A bark. Before she could even process what was happening, Snug charged into the darkness, hot on Moloch's trail. Portia wasted no time assessing the situation. Instead, she sprinted after her long-lost best friend straight into the fog, ready to finish what they started.
Nice.